Hello and welcome to another Times Radio Members Question and Answer. Now today we're answering your comments and questions on our Frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram. I present Frontline and a number of other programmes, but I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer, a NATO planner and commentator on all things geopolitical, cyber, terrorism and anything else people ask me to do. But it's your comments and your points today that I want to get to. First one comes from Adrian. And you say many journalists are stating that Russia has momentum in the Ukraine war. What do they actually mean by that? The IISS circulated that the full occupation of Donbass would take the Russians more than 4 years and more than 1 million dead. That's more than the whole of World War I in time, and more than double the dead from the number now for a minor section of Ukraine. What does the so-called momentum mean? The terror bombardment of civilians never broke a people's will. On the other hand, Ukraine appears to be very successful in crippling Russia's infrastructure to a point where it really frustrates its capacity to wage war effectively. Let Russians do their own propaganda and do some serious thinking yourself, rather than blurbing out lazy platitudes. I'd love to know who it was that, Adrian, who's been saying that, because I've been quite clear. And I think we've been quite clear on Frontline that the Russians, talking about the Russians winning by them moving forward and taking tens of meters every day or a few hundred meters every week is not advancing the front line. UK Defence Intelligence has done a study, which I think the IISS may be quoting, and said it would take 4.4 years to capture the rest of the Donbass at the advancement rates that the Russian forces have done so far across the area, and would take 1.9 million casualties to capture that small area. So you're 100% right. There is no momentum. And what you highlight is Ukraine's attacking Russia's ability to continue to prosecute the tactical war by attacking operational level targets, the oil infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, logistic nodes, command and control bunkers, assassinating Russian generals, airfields, etc., etc., etc. That is where most wars are won or lost. So you're 100% right. Too many commentators focus on what is happening at the tactical level and seem to think that moving forward by a few meters is success and suggests that you have momentum, when in reality you have to look at the strategic, the operational and the tactical levels together. Russia may have a small amount of momentum at the tactical level. Ukraine has got a significant and increasing amount of momentum at the operational level. And the strategic level, I think at the moment, Russia is playing the United States. Ukraine is holding its own, but at the moment we have stalemate. So operational level will always trump, excuse my pun, tactical level, provided the tactical level doesn't collapse completely. So in balance, Ukrainians are winning. Okay, next point comes from Randy. Randy, Europeans are behaving like Trump will be president forever. He has a tad more than 3 years to go and a little more than a year until the House and maybe the Senate will flip. There's no rush to make a bad deal, is there? Randy, you've hit a very important point. And we are looking at too many European leaders thinking Donald Trump will be there forever. I think part of that is because people are concerned that the likes of Pete Hegseth may take over from him and continue with his policies to do with Ukraine. So it might be another 4 years on top of that, so 7 years in total. But again, people are forgetting, as you pointed out quite nicely, the midterms are coming up. And I think Trump's desire to deal with things on the international stage will flip to domestic politics for a period of time. And he'll start dumping international difficulties, and therefore he may dump Ukraine and support for that, or at least it's not going to get prominence. But European leaders are pandering a little bit too much to the Trump factor. So a good and very fair point. AJ, you bring out the next point. Zelensky with his coalition with a struggling lot looks a laughable stock root causes of the problem. On one side, Germany. Right. I'll start that again. This has been abbreviated clearly to fit in. Zelensky and his coalition, I'm assuming you're talking of the coalition of the willing, that you're referring to as the struggling lot, looks laughable. And you say that they're the root causes of the problem with one side, Germany and France, who are supposed to be the guarantors of the ex-Minsk agreements, were both of them publicly announced they cheated and lied with the corrupt to the teeth Zelensky. With that, parties were Russia's need to sign long-lasting peace agreements in such a pathetic rush. AJ, you're confusing me slightly here in the way this has been written. However, I think you're getting things completely wrong. Germany and France didn't sign up the Minsk agreements. We had the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. Germany wasn't involved in it whatsoever in providing security guarantees to the Ukrainians. Of course, the Russians were there to provide security guarantees to the Ukrainians. And no one did that whenever Russia illegally invaded Crimea in 2014. Is it pathetic? No. Who's losing? Well, who's lost so far? Vladimir Putin. The Russians have lost. Putin has not achieved his strategic goals of making the Ukrainian government collapse, turning Ukraine into a puppet state, of a burgeoning new Soviet Union style organization with Putin as the Tsar at the center of it. So I think there might be too much of a rush to try and get some form of ceasefire and peace agreement with Russia. I agree with you because the conditions have not been set for that. But do I think there's one coming? No, not in the slightest. Putin doesn't want it. So the rest of it is just talk that's going on at the moment. Marty, your point next. Interesting, isn't it? Having to rebuild the military structure during wartime is an enormous undertaking, but it is needed. Otherwise, the front gets patchy with each battalion doing its own in exaggerated terms. Another point the US leadership does not get. The remaining part of the Donetsk Oblast is highly fortified. Giving away would, for some promises not to attack, would be suicidal for Ukraine, wouldn't it? Marty, I'll take your second point first. Yes. And the Ukrainians would have to then regenerate further defenses outside that, and that's wasted effort that they've got. And it gives the Russians clear defensive positions. It also gives them territory that they can't capture for at least another 4 years, and 1.9 million casualties, according to UK defense intelligence estimates. And the Ukrainians rebuilding their military infrastructure during wartime, they're not just rebuilding it, they're completely changing their tactics from the lowest level right through to the highest level, from squad level and vehicle level. Crew tanks. The old Russian tanks have a crew of 3. The Western tanks have a crew of 4. So from that very low level right up to changing from district defensive positions and district defensive formations through to corps with a maneuver capability within it, and changing to a maneuverist doctrine is something that I think many Western armies would struggle to be able to do if they could do it at all. The Ukrainians are giving us a lesson in how warfare changes and how to be adaptable in it, and they're probably the most tactically adept country and a tactically adept military of any that we have in the world at the moment. So that's throwing the gauntlet down. Please, if anyone feels different, come and challenge me. Deborah, your point next. Surely a NATO-like agreement is way more expensive for the Allies than just letting Ukraine in. Can this bankrupt the West? And NATO, Deborah, you're talking here about a NATO-like Article 5 agreement to guarantee the peace of Ukraine. It's words that are being thrown out there. The Americans haven't agreed to it. The Europeans haven't agreed to it. NATO countries haven't agreed to it. The coalition of the willing hasn't agreed to it. And I think what we find is whenever an off-the-cuff statement is made by a politician who doesn't think of the wider implications, it's picked up with the press, it's magnified, and there isn't any real detail behind it. And therefore, if there's an Article 5 type agreement, would it be more expensive for the Allies? Not necessarily than a full Article 5 and bringing Ukraine into NATO. I think if we did bring Ukraine into NATO, Russia would probably up the ante even more than it's doing at the moment. before Ukraine got admitted to NATO. But Ukraine's not up to the right standard yet to be admitted to NATO. There's an awful lot it would have to do before that could even be considered. There was an awful lot that would have had to do before that would have even been considered back in 2022, before the Russians invaded. Ukraine is many, many, many years, if not decades, off NATO membership. And that's just a fact of how people get absorbed into NATO. Next point comes from Walter. Walter, you say, who cares what the Russians don't want? What sure is we want security in Europe and Ukraine. Putin doesn't dictate European security. If NATO scares Russia, it means that NATO is strong enough to give the shivers to Putin and Putin's Kremlin. Walter, you're right. But if Europe wants security with Ukraine as part of it, then Europe should be giving Ukraine more capability to deal with the Russian threat and to push them out of its territory. And Europe could be stepping up even more sanctions and taking the frozen Russian funds, of which I think 200 billion of it are in Belgian banks, 100 billion elsewhere, and confiscating it. They've set the precedents for that to happen, but they haven't done it yet. So there's an awful lot more that Europe can do to step up and show even more support to Ukraine. Nick, your point, final point, I think, is interesting contrast between David Clay Johnson, Trump's biographer and journalist, and Robert Fox. Robert thinks Trump does care about bloodshed and loss of life. I think David is closer to the mark. I haven't seen David's comments, but I'm assuming he's saying that Trump doesn't care about loss of life. My view, from what I'm hearing, I think Trump does care about loss of life from a gross perspective, but from a macro perspective, does he care whether there's another 5,000 lost today, 5,000 tomorrow? No, but he does want everything to stop. But it's a very selfish motivation that he's got behind it, and that's the Nobel Peace Prize. That's what he wants to achieve. So we're hearing a lot of words out of a politician, and they may not be the reality of what they are trying to do from a practical perspective. Where have we heard a politician who's given out some commentary and actually followed it through with the reality of actions to meet the exact understanding of that? Because if Trump really did want to stop the bloodshed, he would arm Ukraine to the teeth and push Russia back fast. And that would be the quickest way to stopping this conflict. So thank you very much indeed for watching this week's question and answer and posting your questions. Remember, if you want access to exclusive videos and to have your questions answered, please sign up for Times Radio membership. And of course, you can get us in your favorite podcast channels now. Just search for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.